Thank you for joining us for today's HPL seminar. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce our visiting speaker, Dr. Toni Arndt, who is a professor in biomechanics at the Swedish School of Sport and Health Sciences. Toni completed his undergraduate degree in biology and human movement sciences in New Zealand and Australia before receiving a scholarship to pursue his PhD at the German Sport University in Cologne. His doctoral research focused on asymmetrical loading of the Achilles tendon, a line of inquiry that he continued during his postdoctoral work at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. Here he developed and applied unique invasive techniques to study intrinsic foot kinematics. As I mentioned, he is now a professor of biomechanics at the Swedish School of Sport and Health Sciences, also called GIH, in Stockholm, and he is specializing in lower extremity muscle and tendon function, athletic footwear, parasports, and sports biomechanics. He served as the Dean of Research and Doctoral Education at GIH for 6 years and as Pro Vice Chancellor from 2022 to 2024. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed scientific articles and has supervised 13 PhD students to completion. And in recognition of his contributions to the field, he has received the Swedish Senior Prize for Sports Science Research in 2020. He is a past president of the International Society of Biomechanics and currently serves as a consultant for World Athletics, overseeing the compliance of athletic footwear used in elite competition. When I asked him about a fun fact, he said that he once cycled the length of Sweden, a 2,200 kilometer race, and broke the record by completing it in just 104 hours. And as a side fun fact, Toni is known among athletes and the footwear industry as the footwear police for his role in monitoring shoe compliance, which is fitting considering his title for today's talk, Advanced Footwear Technology and its performance enhancing effects. What is happening? Is it cheating? Are there injury risks? Thank you, Toni.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Thanks for the introduction, and thank you, Brent, for the invitation to speak here today. It's an honor to come to the University of Calgary and the esteemed Human Performance Laboratory, which is of course well known around the biomechanics world. And I'm really looking forward to doing my presentation today. Just a fun fact, I actually rode that ride 3 times, not just once. That'd be correct. And as was mentioned, the topic of my talk is advanced footwear technology and performance enhancing effects. What is happening? And then side questions, is it cheating and are there injury risks? In 2023, in the Berlin Marathon, Tix Vasepa broke the world record in a time of 2:11:53, which broke the previous record by over a minute. Last year in the Chicago Marathon, Bruce Getich broke it again in a time for the first time under 2 hours 10 minutes by a couple of seconds. So nearly by another 2 minutes. So in 2 years, the world record for women in the marathon has been broken by over 3 minutes total, which is a lot in just a couple of years. Both were wearing shoes with what we call advanced footwear technology. We can discuss with Benno if he agrees with that or not, but it's a nice abbreviation to just call them AFT shoes or super shoes, as a lot of people also call them. I'm sure a lot of you are aware that already in 2019, Eliud Kipchoge ran a marathon distance in under 2 hours. This was something that previously had been thought to be impossible, like the limits of how fast a human can run marathon. And Calvin Kipton was also in the, I think, goes to Chicago, as you can see, in 2023, also broke the men's marathon world record. So there's a lot happening in these long distance races. I mentioned Eliud Kipchoge. You can see here what his time was. The reason why I said it was a marathon distance, I didn't say he just ran a marathon, is because it wasn't actually a competition. He had a run organized just for himself, just to try and beat 2 hours. He had all these guys that he's sprinting away from behind him that were running with him the whole run, and they were swapped during the run so that they were always unfatigued. They were running in front of him, so they were taking the wind. He had a car in front of him, which had a laser light on the road, which was the exact 2-hour timing. And the car was obviously also taking wind, and it was a perfectly flat circuit run that he had. So it wasn't a normal marathon, but it was pretty cool to watch. It's almost like it could be a new sport, marathon time trial sort of thing. Okay, the large international sports companies have, in recent years, it's been a little while now, but it's still relatively recent, developed these innovative running shoes, which have been scientifically shown to improve performance. This sort of started in 2016 in the Olympic Games in Rio, where 5 of the 6 podium positions in the men's and women's marathon were all from runners wearing the Nike Vaporfly. All were wearing the same model shoe, except for one. And this made World Athletics, the international governing body, realize that, well, this isn't very fair. You have to be wearing Nike Vaporfly if you want to win. And that's not necessarily fair for those that are sponsored by different companies. And the question arose whether they should be regulated. A significant improvement in track and field results has also been seen, not just long distance running. So there is this dilemma. Is it actually cheating? If everyone's wearing the same shoe, is that still cheating? Should it be regulated? Should everything just be let flourish? So you can have as much innovation, as much performance enhancement as you want? And which shoes should be accepted if it is regulated? To help understand all of this, we need the biomechanists that try and understand the mechanisms behind this performance enhancement. The overriding rule, there's actually specific rules now for the athletic shoes, but the overriding rule states that the shoes must not give athletes any unfair assistance or advantage. That they're giving assistance and advantage, there's no doubt about anymore. The question is whether it's actually unfair. I also like the fact that you don't have to wear 2 shoes, you can wear 1 or 2 or run barefoot if you want. Okay, so what are we talking about? That's Elliot Kipchoge again, with the shoes that he ran this sub 2-hour marathon distance. And the shoe was very specifically a collaboration between Nike and Elliot for himself. So the shoe very, very much adapted for his running style, his running speed, his anthropometrics, his strength, and so on. The main feature that revolutionized these shoes is this structure you see in red here, which originally was always just called a carbon fiber plate, because in the Nike, it is actually a carbon fiber plate that's in the shoe. And this is pretty much the same shoe that we can see blown up on the left-hand side here. But it's not just that. They're also very thick, a lot thicker than traditional shoes were. The developments in material sciences for the shoe sole material are just exploding at the moment. So the soles are more and more energy returning, and the shoes generally have these characteristics, and the stiffness on the longitudinal direction is truly rigid element that we prefer to call it now, a lot higher than it was previously. I just want to quickly mention why I'm so interested in this. In 2019, I was at a conference in Shanghai, and I ended up talking to a guy that was giving a keynote lecture there, and he was from World Athletics. And he mentioned all of this background, and that they didn't really know what to do at that stage. A few weeks later, it was the Tokyo Marathon, and once again, everyone that was on the podium was wearing Nike Vaporflies. So he said, "Hey, Tony, what can we do? And can I send you the shoes so you can have a look at them?" He sent me the shoes, and I had a look at them, and they basically like what we just saw there. And we started up a working group together with some of the bigger companies, Nike, Puma, Adidas, World Athletics, and myself as a biomechanist, to try and see if we could get a consensus on some rules for these shoes. We worked for about a year trying to devise these. The rules do exist now. And my position with World Athletics is specified in the rules. They say that there should be, or there has to be, an independent expert who can help check compliance of the shoes with the rule. So before anyone can compete in a World Athletics event, they have to make sure they're wearing a shoe that's on this list that's getting longer and longer of shoes that are allowed, that are compliant. Normally, World Athletics will look at the shoes and the specification sheets and not a problem. If there are any issues, the shoe gets sent to me and I have made my evaluation. I do some measurements for the shoe to either be on this list or not be on the list if it's not compliant. Another job that I have, which is part of this expert part, is that if anyone breaks a world record in any athletics event, any of them, then the shoes get sent to me. The world record doesn't stand until the shoes have been approved. At the recent World Championships in Tokyo, there was only one world record. So there was Mondo Duplantis in the pole vault. He was wearing these. And so quickly before I give them back to him, because he happened to be in Sweden, I thought I'd bring them here first and let you all see his shoes. So these are the actual shoes that jump 630. Okay, so as a bit of a summary of what we think are the main characteristics of the shoes that enhance performance, one's very simple. They don't weigh much. I mean, I've got two of the models here. They're light, and there's quite a consensus in the scientific literature that 100 grams, for example, less mass of the shoe will improve running economy by 1%. So just by being light, they're already very, very good shoes. The sole material, like I mentioned, the sole height, and the longitudinal stiffness. These are the sort of defining features of AFT shoes. What's interesting in this field is that it's basically a scientific field, even though it's shoe biomechanics, and some of the big experts in shoe biomechanics are in the room here, has been going for a long time. But science on AFT shoes has obviously only started since AFT shoes exist, which hasn't been that long. So there's still so many questions that are out there that we're trying to answer that we don't necessarily know. We're not sure the companies know, they laugh at us because we don't know, we're not quite sure who's following who. But one thing that's still really open, and there's a lot of people working on right now, is how is the interplay between AFT shoes and neuromusculoskeletal function. How does this work? Is that the main defining feature of why people get better? And we're not quite sure. We assume so, but the actual mechanisms are still largely unknown. This is Kip Stateva again, by the way. As soon as she crossed the finish line of the marathon when she broke the world record, she took off her shoe and kissed it. And then she sent it to me. Anecdotally, a lot of people say that when you run in these shoes, you don't get as tired. And it's been shown, and I'll show a bit of data on this, that muscles require less work for the same performance. There's also consensus that there's a decreased loss of energy at the MTP joint, at the metatarsophalangeal joint, and that's due to this rigid element, where normally you, at the end of the stance phase, have quite a large dorsiflexion of your toes, but by being stiff, the shoe is preventing a lot of this dorsiflexion, which means that the energy that you normally would lose through the dorsiflexion is decreased. It's stiffening up your joint. Actually, maybe this one as well. One of the things that I do, if necessary, is to look at the configuration of the place. So I sometimes cut up the shoe. And here's just an example of the Nike shoe again. You can see in its cross section the carbon fiber plate going the complete length. Okay, so there's two main aspects of the shoe, or major aspects of the shoe, that I think we should lift. One is that the sole compression. So when you compress the sole, there'll be an energy return, and these new materials are really increasing this energy return in compression and then expanding again. The other one is the one I mentioned with decreased dorsiflexion at the end of stance phase and a decreased loss of energy due to that. And these aren't new effects. You saw maybe the references I had down here, they're both from Calgary actually, and they've already proven these effects in shoes. A study by Volt Hallhammer, who have done a lot of the initial research in this field, compared 3 different shoes. At this stage, the Nike, what ended up being the Vaporfly, was still a prototype, so that's the NP shoe. He looked at the Adidas Boost shoe and a Nike standard shoe that had no AFT features. What he looked at was the metatarsophalangeal joint that I've been talking about, and the NP joint had both a lower negative work rate, having closer to the 0 line, and a reduced dorsiflexion angle as mentioned. So these have also been experimentally proven effects of these shoes. So we have long lever arm about the ankle joint. If you have the muscular strength in your calf muscles to get over this long lever arm, that will increase the moments throughout the ankle joint and give a good prerequisite for higher performance as well. The thin sole includes more energy return material, just because it's thicker. New materials, the rigid element inserted in the midsole. The reason we changed to rigid element rather than carbon fiber plate is that it's quite often not carbon fiber anymore. It can be any stiff material, and it's quite often certain variations of plastic. And it's not always a plate anymore either. The original shoes had what we're passing around now, the plate, but quite often it's now different structures in the shoes with their carbon fiber. The different plates in the Mondo shoe, for example, aren't just a plate. And we have a specific metatarsophalangeal joint. So the proof of the performance enhancement is not just in the biomechanics. There's also a few statistical studies that have been conducted. This one's got a few years. It's a few years old now, by Stefan Bermond. He's actually the guy I talked to in Shanghai. And he looked at the seasonal best times across the whole world, the best time each season of any athlete in the world, for males in the top 3 and females in the bottom 3, 10 kilometers, half marathon and marathon. And he just compared these times. And he basically found that in the last couple of years, since the introduction of AFT, there was a highly significant improvement in the times across all of the distances. Stefan's a clinician and also a physiologist, and he works with all the rules with World Athletics and has very, very good insight into it. And in his article, he states that if this is not due to the AFT shoe introduction, then it must be some new form of blood doping or similar doping that we don't know about. So it's that high an effect. Interestingly, the improvement for females was greater than for males. That's something that's still very much under study at the moment. Please note that these are obviously the very, very best in the world, and it's not quite sure whether it's the same effect for recreational runners or runners at a lower level. But Mason, just last year, showed something similar in the comparison male-female. This one takes a bit of getting used to. So the red dots are the difference in best times between males and females in percent on the x-axis and for the different events. The red dots are before the introduction of AFT. For example, for the 10 kilometers, there was a difference between the best males and females of 10% in the times. Since the introduction of AFT, it's gone down to nearly 8%. So the gap is closing. And if you project this into the future, how long will it take until a female runs a marathon faster than a male? Possible. Maybe, we're not sure, but it could happen. So at that level, they seem to be getting more effect, females compared to males. So where did this working group end up? After a lot of discussion and a lot of was going to say argument, but maybe that's a bit tough. But I mean, we didn't always agree with the companies because they obviously want something else. But we now have rules that regulate the height. So distance running shoes, such as these ones, the height at two positions, which are defined in World Athletics as 12% from the rear end of the foot and 75% of from the rear end of the foot. So about here and here. The sole is not allowed to be over 40 millimeters. They're quite often about 39.5 millimeters. So that's a main rule, and of course there is a regulation of how the rigid element is configured. There's only, in distance running shoes, there's only allowed to be one plate. If there's more than one, it has to be in the same plane. They're not allowed to be overlapping, so there's no sandwich effect. And for example, some companies are trying that at the anterior end, at the toe end, they actually diverge so that there's an underspring effect in the plate, and that's not allowed. So they have to be in one plane. The problem with the rules is that they're quite badly written. So companies have a bit of a field day trying to get around them. I've been a bit focused on Nike so far, but it's not Nike only anymore. All of the major companies and also a big bunch of new companies. I think this year there's been 70 new shoe companies, because I think they just realized that, hey, we can do this as well. So there's so many new companies coming in now, and pretty much all of them have some version of an AFT shoe. I think this one's interesting. Nike obviously has a patent on this plate system, so other companies have to do something slightly different. And Adidas, for example, has 5 fingers going along each of the metatarsals as its rigid element. And you can actually see at the bottom of the Adidas 3 of these. Quite a nice marketing thing as well, the 3 stripes of Adidas. Right. I'd like to talk a little bit about energy return, because that's something that we discussed a lot in this working group as well, and went backwards and forwards with the company on. So very simply, if you have a forced position or forced deformation curve, position on the x-axis, force on the y, and you have a material, anything, but in this case a shoe, and compress it, you'll get an energy storage curve. That's, in this case, the top curve. If you then release it, the energy will be returned, and that's the bottom curve. The smaller the distance or area between these two curves, the higher the energy, the relative energy return. So more of the energy that you put in is also coming back. If they're completely on top of each other, it's 100%. The area underneath the bottom curve is the absolute energy return. So another parameter that we could be looking at. And we just tested 6, in this case, pretty random shoes, just to show that different shoes will have different energy return curves. If you take the same 6 shoes and then look at relative energy return and absolute energy return, you can see that there's differences between them. The highest relative energy return in this case was 83%. And I'm pretty sure that was the Nike Vaporfly that we found here. This is interesting because in a study a while ago, year 2000, Darren Stepanovich and Benno Nig had a highest energy return, if I remember correctly, of 70%. So in these, this is already a quarter of a century, but the energy returns in the best shoes have gone up considerably. And this is also already a couple of years old, and we're getting some that are nudging 90% now. Once again, Paul Cummer's study from 2018 with the 3 different shoes that I mentioned before. He also did the similar thing, looking at the compression energy return, and found that the highest was also for the Nike prototype. He measured 87% in this case. I do have more pictures, but after the first one. Sorry.
Which one did you?
On this. Oh, on that. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry about that. So these energy return tests, I'd just like to acknowledge KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, who are helping us with these tests. There are now 3 tests that I'll be talking about a little bit that we are using in our study of energy return in some of our experimental studies. Once again, we've got 2 positions. We are just using the same positions that World Athletics specifies for the height at 12%, 75%, where we have 2 relatively uncontroversial tests. It's compression, as I mentioned, at the vertical compression of the sole at the forefoot and the rear foot. And this is similar to what Håkan had in his study, and it's been done in quite a few studies, and it's not anything that's particularly debatable. But due to the rigid element increasing the longitudinal bending stiffness, we also have a tensile bending stiffness test. So we also bend the forefoot and then release it and see what the energy return is in that direction. When we proposed this to the companies, they said, I mean, Tony, you don't need that, that's ridiculous, like pointless. So that's when we decided that we really need that one. What we did together with KTH is we had 56 shoe models, and that's thanks to the companies themselves. They provided these shoes for us. And we grouped them into 3 groups. Those that had no rigid element and were under 30 millimeters, those that did have a rigid element were with plate ones at the bottom, and they did not get divided into 2 groups because all of them were over 30 millimeters, so there was only 1 group there. And then we had the no plate group that was also above 30 millimeters. So we had 3 groups. And we conducted these 3 tests that you just saw on the 56 shoes. And on this graph, we have absolute energy return on the left-hand side, relative on the right-hand side, and the 3 different tests across the bottom. The 3 bars in each position are the no plate low, no plate high, and the plated shoe, or the AFT shoe. And in all cases, you can see that the solid grey AFT shoe had the highest energy return, and in most cases, this was also significant compared to the other shoes. And this is pretty basic research, but it does show that the energy return of AFT shoes is significantly higher than shoes that don't have AFT technology. So what we found, even in the shoes without the rigid element, just increasing the stack height from below to above 30 millimeters improved both of the energy return parameters. Including the rigid element increased both of the energy returns by another about 6%. And this is quite an interesting one because this is evening compression. So if you compress a shoe at the rear foot without a plate, it's going to have a lower energy return than if there's a plate in there, which is perpendicular to what we're pressing at. And first we didn't expect that, but it actually makes quite a lot of sense because the plunger of the machine is quite local. But by having a plate, it's actually spreading out over a greater surface area of the energy returning material underneath it, and you're going to get the benefit of all of that material. So it makes sense, but we didn't actually expect it at the start. The stack height had no effect on this bending energy return test. But the relative energy return in the tensile bending, the bending test, was increased by approximately 10% by increasing the stiffness by having the plate in there, which also makes sense. But I mean, that's a lot. 10% increase in this tensile bending stiffness And we feel that this is also a relevant test for people running. One of the big arguments against all of this, everything that I've been presenting here, is that it's very, very isolated. We take a shoe and put it in a machine, you can basically stand back and you're not even touching it. And that's obviously not what's happening. Normally there's a person in the shoe running. But if you try to have people in the shoes running, measuring energy return, it would be different for you than for you than for you. Then we could never regulate it. So by having it isolated, it's actually very square and defined, at least we can regulate something. So, what do these shoes do for actual running economy? Again, Paul Cummer, and he's done a few papers with similar results. Once again, same three shoes with energy return curves. What he showed here was energetic cost equals roughly running economy, and the people in this study ran at 3 different speeds, and the average for all the participants are the dark black curves. And please note that lower numbers are better because it's less cost, so it's less energetic cost. And at all three speeds, the Nike prototype had the lowest energetic cost. Paul Cummer, I'm doing too good here, showed that this improvement compared to the Nike standard shoe was approximately 4%. And this is something that's quite interestingly been done by a number of studies now. A lot of them landed about 4% improvement, which is also why Nike then started calling their Vaporflies Vaporfly 4%. This is something that you're absolutely not allowed to do. You cannot say that any energetic cost of running economy is the same thing as performance, because it's not. Performance is a time. By improving running economy, you could still maybe run slower. But if you did, anyway, then this 4% over marathon time would be almost 5 minutes difference. So we also looked at a study where we actually, the main reason for this study was to look at individualization, why it's different effects for different people. We took shoes from this list of 56. We took 2 of the top AFT shoes, one AFT shoe that wasn't really at the top, it had AFT technology but wasn't very good in energy return, and one control shoe. We measured the energy return at the 2 positions for these, and as expected, the good AFT shoes had the highest energy return, the worst AFT shoe didn't, and which one was it, the bottom one? At the 75% position, it was actually even lower than the control shoe. So it was a pretty bad AFT shoe in terms of energy return. I won't go into too many details here, but we did maximum VO2 tests, and from that test, defined 60, 70, and 80% running speeds of the 30 participants, elite recreational runners in Sweden, and let them run in these 4 different shoes at these 3 different speeds to see what the energy return and relative how the energy related to the running economy. These graphs show improvement of these 3 AFT shoes relative to the control shoe. So there's no curve for the control shoe because that's what we're comparing to here. The 2 very good AFT shoes obviously had the highest, and interestingly, once again, around 4% improvement compared to a standard non-AFT shoe. And that was both for males and females. Again, the results aren't quite the same. We haven't actually looked into this, but the curves are a different shape for females than for males. So there's some effect there that we're not quite sure about yet. Also, the not so good AFT shoe at the lowest speed at least was actually worse for the running economy than the standard control shoe. I'll be showing a few of these slides now, all very, very similar. Each slide is for a different one of the energy return tests, and we have the relative and the absolute energy returns on the 2 graphs. Again, energetic cost on the y-axis, so to be nice and pedagogic. It's better when they're lower. So it's an improvement going downwards. On the x-axis, sorry, we have the relative energy return or absolute on the left-hand graph. So to the right is better. What we see is highly significant correlations of the energy return with running economy for males and females for this test. Which means that I can go through the next one pretty quickly, because for the rear foot 12% position, we see the same thing. And for the tensile bending stiffness, we also see the same thing. So for all three tests, the correlation to the running economy of these elite recreational, some of top elite as well, but we don't have 30 top elite runners in Sweden. We can see a high correlation between running economy and energy return. And this, although it's been talked about and Paul Kramer showed it indirectly by actually measuring both of the things, but not really comparing them or correlating them. This is the first time that such correlations have actually been shown. Could this be something that world athletics might be interested in regulating shoes? Because rather than, as you can see, if you're just looking at the height of the sole and what the plates look like, that's just what we call morphometric measurement. We're not looking at them, we're just seeing what they look like. That doesn't say at all what they're actually doing. If we do this, we're actually at least looking at something that the shoes are contributing to the running. And my suggestion, and I had discussions with World Athletics about this, is that this should be in the rules, but it's very, very difficult. The companies are all used to the rules now, everyone's working according to them, the athletes are used to it. So of course it's a huge ask to, at some stage, maybe change them. So what now? The study that I mentioned with the correlations, because also had a lot of other parameters in it. We were looking at different strength parameters, different anthropometric parameters, body height, weight, shoe length, foot length, Achilles tendon length, calf muscle strength, quadricep strength, all sorts of things, also looking at their effect on the running economy, because we want to get at why it's so individual. In these 30 runners, we have one guy running in one of the shoes got over 10% improvement, which is phenomenal. Another guy in the same shoe had negative effect. So there goes the question of if it's fair if everyone's wearing the same shoe, because it's not. And the top athletes in the world are getting shoes made just for them. The shoes that you just saw, the Puntish shoes, they're made very, very specifically for him. But all the pole vaulters are wearing them, which doesn't mean they're all doing the same effect though. Something that's arisen is that, like I said, it's a new field. AFT shoes are relatively new still. I don't think we know very much at all so far, at least not scientifically or with scientific evidence of injury factors with AFT shoes. So I'll be presenting a few data completely fresh on the longitudinal study of injuries that we've been doing. I've applied for a grant to look more into this energy return, but not just in shoes. How does energy return actually work in bare feet, and specifically in prostheses? Like I mentioned in my introduction, we're doing quite a lot of work with power sports. And we're getting funding from these. Okay, have to start looking at the time really quick. But intuitively though, if you're thinking about injury risks, there are some factors that maybe you can imagine could cause more injuries, or we could hypothesize. The longer lever arm, like I mentioned, is great if you have the strength to use it, but it could also mean that there's higher loading on the Achilles tendon and calf muscles. Is that an injury mechanism? The stack height means that not only the stack height, but the instability of the stack height. The soft material and 40 millimeters of it is pretty wobbly. And it's also a higher risk of maybe spraining an ankle if you're running around a corner. And a new thought that's flourishing at the moment is how passive the foot is. I was in a double X-ray videography study where we looked at what the foot does in the shoe when you're running. And it's incredible how passive the foot actually becomes when running in these shoes. It's not doing much. And if somebody runs only in AFT shoes for 5 years, I'm just making this up now, they're just going to atrophy in the small muscles in the foot. And what injuries might arise from something like that? We don't know, but it's a lot of people are starting to talk about that. And a lot of the data that we have at the moment is still based very much on anecdotal evidence in all of these aspects. I'd like to present some data on this last one. A longitudinal follow-up study. We had over 300 people, of which 271 were in the end included, participating for over 40 weeks in a study where they recorded everything they were doing with their running. They had an app where they noted how many kilometers did they run, how fast were they running, was it a competition, did you get injured, and did you have to stop running due to this injury, where was the injury, and so on. And they did this every week for this time. This one also takes a bit of getting a head around, but each of the athletes is on the y-axis and time from here. Each little clip is 1 week where they answered. So those that have a solid line going through, they answered every single week during these 41 weeks. So compliance was actually pretty good, which is not always the case in these longitudinal studies. The dark blue were the ones that we defined as non-AFT users, and the light blue as AFT users. All the red little dots or dashes are injuries. So this is just an overview of how many injuries occurred in both the groups. What we found is we also divided this up into males and females, that the running related injuries for AFT users and non-AFT users were not significantly different, except for the prevalence, which is defined, no, I don't have a definition here, the weeks per year in which they said that they were injured was actually significantly higher in the AFT users for men than the non-AFT users. So maybe it's some indication it wasn't for the females, but for the males it was. Maybe some indication that some of these possible injury mechanisms actually do occur. Thought there might be a little start there. And also the location of the injury was for the non-AFT users significantly higher at the toes than for the AFT users, which may be an effect due to this stiffening of the metatarsophalangeal joint, may be an effect just of the cushioning, but at all the other locations there was no significant effect between the two shoe groups. Just a couple of quick points on spikes. There's another spike here. There's even less research on them. And we really don't know much about what spikes with AFT do. And it's not always the cushioning that seems to be the effect. Carsten Malm broke the world record in this shoe, not this actual shoe, but this model. And it's basically just the carbon fiber plate and shoelaces. I mean, there's not much else to it. There's no cushioning in it, and there's a sock liner in there, because it might be a bit too hard to run just on the plate. And so this was an indication to me, and you also felt it with the Duplantis shoes, that in spikes it appears to be far much more important that they're just stiff. And I mean, these are really stiff. The rules are slightly different. They apply to both track and field events. And apart from standard spike regulations, there's a certain length that are allowed to be. There's only allowed to be 11 spikes, but these aren't new rules. It's just rules for spikes. But apart from them, the height, instead of 40 millimeters for the distance running shoe, is 20 millimeters. This was actually modified last year. It was 25 for some events before that. And for any field events, it's not allowed to be higher at the forefoot than at the rear foot. So even if they're under 20 millimeters, the forefoot's not allowed to be higher than the rear foot. And that was a reason recently why a result actually was removed, nullified, because the person had been jumping in a shoe that was higher than the forefoot. As you can see, it's not just the carbon fiber plate in the Duplantis shoe. The spike shoes were allowed to have another plate because the spikes have to be somewhere. So they're allowed to have this rigid element along the whole shoe, but they're also allowed another plate solely for the insertion of spikes. And you can see a little bit how companies are going around these rules from the bad wording, because the extra plate in the Duplantis shoe to me does not look like it's only there for the insertion of spikes. As you saw, it was curved, so that's not a spring element. There's cushioning material between the element, and it's actually a medial and a lateral plate. That's actually two more. But it's very, very difficult to get around the wording, and if we should say no to a 6 meter 30 pole vault, it's pretty likely that World Athletics or me or someone will get sued. And Puma has about 60 lawyers, World Athletics has 2. So it's going to be, it's just a difficult position for them to be in. But there is a recent study that at least shows that sprint times are faster in spikes. That's all I'm showing with this slide. And also for all the participants in this study ran faster in spikes than in traditional shoes. So I mean, this is the closest to real evidence of AFT spike performance that I could find. We haven't done anything ourselves. But that's running. Track and field events are a lot more. What happens in jumping? This is Yaroslav Mahucic breaking the world record at high jump. I mean, she runs a bit, but then she also jumps off one foot. Does she have different shoe on left and right? Maybe. It's the first time I ever said that I would actually want to have both shoes, because just in case. And do they have the same effect or requirements as 400 meter hurdle runners, for example? Throwing, I mean, they do something completely different. World record, I mean, world champion, by the way. And we've actually discussed removing any regulation for throwers, because they don't, all they want is a shoe that sort of stops them when they're letting go of something. Yeah. And there haven't been many world records either lately. So I'd like to look a little bit at the relevance of results across completely different events and the relevance of running economy. I mentioned Hall cover study where if you did this, what you're not allowed to do, comparing energetic cost improvements to running performance, and that was just maybe 5 minutes. But in a marathon, you're running, or these people are running just over 2 hours with, I think, Kipchoge and his sub 2 hour marathon and 45,000 steps. Every step you're getting an effect of these shoes for a long time. And they're just running. I mean, it's pretty simple to run, we can all run. Of course, they've probably got a slightly nicer technique than me anyway. But I mean, basically it's a relatively simple movement and anyone can do it, and the shoe might have a bigger effect in that case. Cindy McLaughlin's world record, 400 meter hurdles. She doesn't run quite as far, but she still has to run once around the stadium, 400 meters. And so it's still quite a lot of steps. So she's going to get that effect for all of those steps. But in between, she has to jump over these things as well. And that means that she has to have a pretty advanced technique to be able to do this efficiently and fast and break the world record. So it's a combination. She has to be very technical, but at the same time, she's still running quite a lot. Then we have Duplantis. He only runs for a few seconds. Then the rest is absolutely incredible. I think we should advise him to get a longer pole next time. He's running out. But I mean, he runs these few seconds. They're obviously going to help, because due to those few seconds, which he runs faster than anyone has ever done in the pole vault, he gets the momentum that he can bend a stiffer pole, and that stiffer pole, if he's got the technique, will be able to get him up. But the technique is like completely unique for him, and the most important thing probably So here, the shoes giving an effect, his father has told me, I mean, Mondo runs faster in these shoes than he has before. So there is an effect there, but after that, I mean, fluffing around 6.5 meters up in the air is probably pretty difficult. I've never been there. So I propose a bit of a spectrum here that he gets some effect, but a lot of it is technique. Compared to Cindy McLaughlin-Lebrone, who gets quite a lot of effect. She still has to run 400 meters, but has to be able to jump hurdles as well. And then a huge effect that you're probably getting in the marathon. So this is just a bit of a philosophical thought that there's a spectrum from least effect to most effect. And that this isn't something to do with regulation. It's just, I think there's a greater effect of in some events than others, and that we maybe think about this when we're considering what AFT has done. I'm really proud of this point where we just submitted an article to the Journal of Philosophy of Sport. I've never done that before. See what happens there. And it's called this. This is where the fun bit starts. Yeah, you can swim naked. So swimming is something that we can all do. We don't actually need anything on us. And that's how fast, if you do swimming at lengths, that's how fast we actually are. It's our buoyancy, it's our technique, it's our nutrition, training, biomechanics and everything. And that's basically how fast you should be. And you should not get faster due to what you're wearing. So people increase the performances due to these shark suits and different suits that were all banned in 2010. And there was a lot of scientific evidence as well that these were actually increasing performance. And the thing is, running, you can do barefoot. You don't need shoes to run. Should you have something on your feet that makes you faster? I don't think so. I think there's two sports, there's probably more, but just these two sports where you actually don't need any technology to perform the sports. And to actually know who's the best runner or swimmer, maybe you should be barefoot or naked, or maybe not. I mean, there's proof that people can run fast barefoot as well. I believe Bukele in 1960 won the Olympic marathon. I actually heard some story that it's because he forgot his shoes. I'm not quite sure if that's true. And I mean, and now kids say they're wearing a shoe, but she just recognized and acknowledged straight away that she ran that fast due a lot to her shoes. These Adidas are, by the way, the lightest AFT shoes at the moment. I think they're around 130 grams now, at least I just. Thank you.
That the floor is open for questions. Who would like to start us off?
Come on.
I think we have a question back there first, and
Thank you for bringing the samples that really help drive home the stiffness of the one, especially the cross-sectional cut, yeah. I was just curious from a design perspective, why did Nike or Adidas, I guess, go to a rod plate design versus like rod design versus stiff
Yeah,
plate?
my spontaneous answer is ask them. Because I mean, obviously I don't know the design secrets and things like that, but I mean, one, they're not allowed to do exactly the same plate because it's patented. Two, I think, now I'm just guessing though, I mean, it's still a longitudinal stiffness, so in quite a nice way, they've done the same thing. What I'm not sure is if they've got some idea that it only increases the longitudinal, but still permits mediolateral flexibility. Maybe there's a thought behind that as well, but I'm not sure. I really don't know that. But there's a lot of different things coming now. Like it's not just those two. There's other versions as well.
So from what you showed, putting the plate in and returning energy stiffness to the heel, do you think, has anyone really optimized that application there? From all the shoes you've tested?
Not in terms of energy return, because that's not kind of the rules, so they don't have to. But for the height, they're playing games. there's all sorts of different ways of trying to reduce the height, that's at 12%. For example, they have a real steep incline of the outer sole, so that the position of 12% is still under 40, but then at 20%, it's way over 40 millimeters. But that's not where it's regulated. So we have told them that they're not allowed to like have a hole in the insole or something just there, because that's too obvious.
So I was also thinking, like, looking at that side cut profile, that plate actually is curved. So have you guys evaluated under the arch of the foot and what the energy return there is? Because you'd be preventing the arch from changing.
Definitely. I actually got a question recently whether there should be some rehabilitation thing for people with arch problems. So that's a really good point, but we haven't done any specific energy return tests right there. But the curvature of the plate is pretty accepted, so that's also a factor. And then it's got the teeter-totter theory as well, and that's obviously part of that. So we have not just the outsole, but also the plate is curved, and that permits the teeter-totter effect if it's there.
I have a question
Yeah.
of the rules that regulate midsole thickness. So there have been some studies that have shown that there is no effect of a thicker midsole past a certain point, and some of the studies have come out of this lab, and also some of the results that you showed from your data. Do you think that's still a valid point of regulation, considering we're not actually seeing any improved performance?
I think so, but it's also a little bit to do with injury mechanism. Because by having unstable, even thicker, you're going to increase the labrum and possibility of spraining an ankle. There's TV images of a half marathon world championship in Gdynia a few years ago, and they ran down quite a steep incline, and then had a 90-degree curve straight away. And a couple of them fell, and most of the others actually stopped to walk around the corner. Because you can't, at that speed, they didn't trust the shoes to be able to do. So I think from the injury perspective, I think the companies don't actually mind it too much either. I think they're sort of living with that. There's a bit of a status quo there. Concerning the World Athletics doesn't cover Ironman or triathlon, and the Norwegian that won Hawaii, I'm not sure what year, but recently, he had 60, I think, millimeters when he was running a marathon, and I'm sure he thinks it's helping. But we haven't ourselves done any studies showing how it changes with other heights, except for these 30 millimeters and below. So it'd be interesting to see when you finish those.
Thanks, Doctor. This is not
Thank you.
for you at all, but I was just wondering ethically, why would you have any rules if everybody has access to some technology? Then why would you have restrictions on technology? I mean, you could even argue the same thing with, let's say, doping. If everybody has access, I mean, you're just testing on an equal playing field.
I think the biggest reason for that is that I think there's two. One is the historical perspective. Is it fair that people now break all these world records that people a long time ago broke without this technology? I'll give the example of the Swedish marathon record. It was broken 36 years ago, it held for 36 years, and now in 2 years it's been broken 3 times by people that one of the first broke that I actually know quite well. Darby Nilsson, and I've been up to him and asked him, where did that come from? And he said the shoes. So I mean,
Right, but are you protecting all people as?
a little bit. I think that's a pretty good argument. The bigger one is the individualization. That even if not everyone has the resources or the results to have the money to be able to do shoes that are specific for me.
Right.
And so everyone else has to wear shoes that are actually made for me. This Carsten Raffel shoe, which is lost, was made just for him. It's Mercedes Formula One that makes the soles for it, and it's just the Carsten. But everyone else wanted to wear it as well, obviously, but they saw his results, but everyone stopped wearing it because it wasn't helping them. And so I don't think that's fair. And also, depending on who you're sponsored by, maybe you're getting shoes that aren't the right ones for you. So I think the individual part is probably the biggest argument. I understand what you're saying though, because I mean, a lot of people say that as well. They can innovate. This is great. New world records. It's exciting.
Right.
And I can see that. But I do like this idea that I sound really old fashioned now. And I'm not saying we should remove all rules and remove all technology, because that's impossible now. It's already there. But we could sort of leave it at some sort of level and leave it there. And we could also do incremental. If we have energy return, we could say it's 80%. But in 2 years, we'll go to 81. But so the companies think it's still fun to make shoes.
That's the second question. So is there a way to sort of theoretically figure out what the maximum human performance is? I mean, it seems that
There were studies on that, but I mean, a few years ago, one of the studies said that you can't run a marathon under 2 hours,
right,
and that's maybe not relevant anymore. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not relevant anymore.
because one would think theoretically there has to be some sort of limit to what the human body can do.
Sure, and I mean, it's always going to be a theory, but you can calculate that.
Right.
And I went through that very quickly, but Calvin Gibson's world record at the moment is 2 hours and 35 seconds. So even in a race, he's getting very, very close.
Right.
Well, he won't. He tragically died in a car accident. So thank you. Nice question.
Robin?
Hi, thanks for the presentation, Tony. I have 2 questions. First one would be, when you get the shoes to your lab and you test them, you said you were doing a couple of measurements and try to see if it was above some limitations. I know it's pretty easy for slide height, 39 millimeters, 39.5, everyone does the same, but for this kind of test, there's some variability. Do you know if like this company are aware of how close to these limits they are? Or like longitudinal bending stiffness, for instance?
Yeah.
Why that value? Why did you define a specific value for that?
The height value.
The stiffness is not stiffness or compression, energy
Yeah.
return.
To the first question, the shorter companies know, and they send blueprints as well of the shoe, how it's built. And in the blueprints, I mean, they know the exact height of all the departments, like the insole, the outer sole, the rubber outsole, and they add them up and they come to 39.8 or something. But that's not actually how I measure it. I don't take it apart and measure the different bits. I actually measure the shoe itself. And we have devised a laser measurement. So it's completely, I can let the shoe go, I can't press it down or anything. So it's extremely accurate. And we've done a tutorial that the company has got of exactly how I measure and what the specifications of the laser are and everything. So they can reproduce that exactly in the laboratory. I'm not sure how many have done that, but it's possible. And the 40 millimeters, I honestly not sure. I think it was a bit of a guess. They looked at what the shoes were at the time and said, okay, not higher than what they are now, which I guess was also an argument against that rule because the Nike Vaporfly was already just under 40 millimeters. So other companies thought that's an unfair advantage for Nike because we're adjusting the rules just for them. But it was just we just wanted a level to have it. And you could also argue that it's pretty pointless to have 40 millimeters at 4 foot because most shoes aren't close to it. But it's, I mean, it's testing our way forwards. And for the spikes, we have changed it from 25 down to 20. So.
I was more thinking about like the stiffness of the shoe, because everyone has kind of slightly different tests.
Yeah.
Says that, and you said like you have limitations as well, your regulations for stiffness or not?
No,
It's like
and that's my argument. I don't like that. I think there should be some form of stiffness regulation. So an example of I had seen in the Lockman something there, and also had a spike shoe in one of the pictures. When she first broke the world record, her New Balance spike shoe was really bad. Or it was really bendy, and she was a phenomenal runner. But then, without changing the model, she broke the world record again, and the same model got the shoe again, and it's really stiff because it's not regulated. They can, as long as the shoe is everything still the same, the stiffness of the plate that can be changed, just like they change the color or something. And so and that annoys me because I mean I think okay now New Balance is jumping on the train as well, and it's not being regulated. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
it's also harder to regulate. There's a lot of tests.
Yes, it's a lot more difficult to have reliability between laboratories. I mean, the companies obviously have to be able to do exactly the same tests that we do that regulate it. Different regulation laboratories would be a benefit, and they would also all have to be doing exactly the same thing. But it is being looked into. There is one lab that's starting to look into actually being the deliverer of such tests.
Okay, we have a question back there, then Andrew, then David, and then back. Okay, so Lisa.
So, I know that you commented a little bit on, sprint shoes, but I was just wondering like why, there's a bigger shift for sprint shoes to look a lot like long jump shoes. Cause like ever since like Kobe Yamamoto, she broke the 100-meter hurdles world record, there was a huge debate as to whether her sprint shoe was a long jump shoe or not. And I'm sure that you tested that and all of that. But now Adidas and Nike and Saucony and all these companies are starting to make their sprint shoes a lot similar to long jump shoes. Is there like a property that they're looking for in those shoes?
I think so. And I think, I mean, a lot of them started to look pretty similar to this. This is what Carlton Barwin uses as well, so he's a sprinter. I think it's a combination of extreme stiffness. I'm not sure how many of you tried to bend this, and cushioning material. And then it doesn't really matter what you bend, because long jumpers, defining parameter for them is also the running speed, obviously. So they're basically sprinters that are shorter. But once again, there's also the question of the jumping foot. Does that have to have some other characteristics? And I can't answer that. But no one's done anything on that. Another factor on this one is, you probably noticed this tongue at the front, super flat. And talking to Barham's trainer, he said, I mean, that's just the extra traction right at the end of stance phase into the, and I don't quite believe that, because it's another carbon fiber element that's also going to have some deformation, maybe give another little energy return there. Carlton Barham actually said it's chosen beer bottles.
Andrew?
So regulating the carbon fiber plate would make much sense with like it having shown in research that there's an optimum stiffness, but that optimum stiffness is individual.
I don't think that's been shown, because optimal stiffness
Is
is,
this the same thing? I think definition showed back with the spring shoes that
Yeah.
there was an optimized, like if the plate was too stiff, the sprinter got slower because the muscles weren't strong enough to push through. Versus, so you
but
just,
it's so different in different events though as well, because I think, if I'm correct, that Darren showed that the acceleration was slower, but the maximum speed was higher, even in stiffer shoes.
Should ask them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
it's meant to be.
You were hiding there. I actually didn't see you.
Yeah, no, that there tends to be an optimal stiff for both in running game. And it's, but it's individualized.
Yeah,
Within a range.
yeah.
So I kind of agree, it might be hard to, like you could put like boundaries rather than put limits. Kind of.
Sure. And I think the trend in what we're seeing is that they're just getting stiffer and stiffer. But even though the shoe is so stiff, when you watch the companies running, he does still bend it a bit. So he's getting something out of it. But I mean, there's so much research to be done here now.
David?
So I believe there's a World Athletic, rule that says a shoe has to be available to, consumers.
Yeah.
But you're also saying that these shoes are modified to the athlete specifically, like, same with Boston Burley's fights, and all the other athletes.
Yeah.
How far can they be modified from that product that's available?
They can't. So they can make a shoe for Sydney.
Yeah.
But then it has to be, the model has to exist and be on this compliant list. Once it's on there, it's not allowed to be changed.
Okay.
But before it's on there, it can be made specifically for her, although she does wear the same as Tempted Ball, for example. And then, even though it's made for her, it can be available for everybody, but they might not get the same effect. So once again, it's individual and probably a bit unfair. And availability doesn't necessarily mean that every single runner's store is going to have it. But it has to be, it's possible to get it for other people as well.
Okay, so for like marathon runners, they don't have a specific class for their foot. So they're, the last for, Kipchoge's foot, is that the last that they use for the?
The last, yeah, but there is actually an exemption, a bit like, what's that called with joking, that it could be on a therapeutical list or something, I'm not quite sure what the term is. If you have medical reason to have an inlay in your shoe, then you can have an exemption and have that inlay in there. So people can adapt a little bit in that way, but the last has to be as it is defined.
Okay.
Okay, question back there, then Benno, and then Tomo.
So there's a lot of regulation regarding shoes, but is there also regulations regarding socks? And you could play around like a lot with cushioning or even extra plates inside socks. You can, they're connected to shoes. If you then test the shoes, they can be local anywhere.
I'm pretty certain there's absolutely no regulations for socks. And also, what we were worried about initially was that people might start putting carbon fiber inlays into their shoes and get stiffness in that way. But I haven't seen it at all. I don't think it's actually eventuated because I think it's very important where the rigid element is in relation to the sole. And I think what we've seen in the energy return tests anyway is that the ones that are roughly around in the middle are the ones that are the best. Right at the bottom was actually one of the bad AFT shoe had a rigid element, but that was right underneath. And I think it would be the same effect if you had it right on top, but it wouldn't get the same effect. But socks, I'm pretty sure aren't here today.
Benno?
Can we go back to running? So what is important? You said the weight, the energy return, and the play. Anything else?
It depends what you have on the energy return, because in that way you also have longitudinal bending stiffness and you have the material in the midsole. So I actually define those two as well, but that's the energy return.
Now, could you give me some percentages that you would expect that would contribute to these 4%?
No. I mean, we do know from the literature that we weight 100 grams less is 1% that are not energy return. Yes, exactly. But that wasn't actually related to AFT shoes, and then it depends on how much each shoe weighs as well. I honestly
The
don't.
reason I ask is the energy return. You know, you have measured energy return in the heel, you have measured energy return in the return. And the energy return under the heel occurs early on, too early to contribute to the performance improvement. So you cannot add that.
The correlations showed high correlation even for the heel energy return.
Yeah, that may be for a different reason, but not
Yeah,
for the energy return. Energy return only can be
More
from.
and I agree with that.
So when you are generous, you would say maybe 1% energy return in the front, up to 1% because the weight is 2%, and then the blade another 2%. So what is the mechanism for the blade?
I think it's the longitudinal bending stiffness, which means both that it reduces energy loss at the metatarsal, but also that it increases the lever arm about the ankle joint, changing the biomechanics of the ankle joint. But I think I'd only say 1% there as well. This is a good game, because I think 1% at least is also the one that was right at the bottom of that list, which is the neuromusculoskeletal combination with AFT shoes that I still don't think we understand properly.
Like that?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's another 3%.
You don't like the seated for the picture.
I love it. The things that I've been presenting are things that could possibly be regulated. That's what I've the whole time had as motivation. And teeter totter is something that is very related to the neuromusculoskeletal biomechanics. And I think that's something difficult to regulate, and it's not something that we've been looking at because of that.
Okay, we had two more questions, Tomo and then Maria, and then two more after that.
So it says if the shoes are helping female runners more compared to the males, so is it could be due to the body weight difference? The reason that I'm saying is I assume that body millimeter is same for both men and women. So when you compress it, because of the applied load difference, that energy storing and returning that hysteresis may end up a different pattern.
Yeah.
So
It's another one that is a bit confusing because the two studies I showed, they're world leading times and world records. And the 30 people that we have in our study now, we didn't necessarily see the better effect of the males. So it's still very poorly understood there as well. That maybe at the very, very top level, the female runners are getting better effect return from the shoes, whereas top recreational runners, which in Sweden is quite far away from the world record, don't necessarily. Now there's a lot of theories on what it might be. That could also be shorter stride length, could be dust weight, it could be shorter feet, it could that they allow 40 millimeters even though the shoes are a lot smaller,
yeah,
and it could be the weight. There's a lot of speculation, but I haven't seen any results actually proving any of them. But it is fascinating that there may be a sex difference there.
when you test that midsole,
Yeah.
is it tested at the same force level?
It is to, we're not, yeah, it is basically for all foods. We only test one size. We've done a control to see that it's about the same at 3 different sizes. But so to regulate even more, we're saying we're only testing size 42. And that's the results that we use.
Maria? So my question, how do you establish the threshold for all these tests? Like how are the rules decided on? How do you draw the line where it's an unfair mechanical advantage for an athlete?
Well, the only thresholds that we have at the moment are the heights. There aren't any thresholds, even though I'd like to propose that for the energy return. And I think I got the question previously that was basically based upon the shoes that existed at the time. That not higher than that. It's pretty ad hoc sort of definition. And that's the two positions, and the positions are actually from the literature where the center of pressure is when you're landing on the heel and when you push off. So very simply from the literature, but the heights, and then that for the spikes, I guess it was the same thing. I didn't decide what heights they were, but I assume it was the same thing. That's what the heights were of the shoes that existed, and they just wanted to regulate so it didn't become more.
Okay, Ariana and then Darren and Walter.
So my question is, when you're doing these compression and bending tests, you're testing the whole shoes, the material and the geometry are important.
Yes.
And you're only concerning geometry. So when you're testing these, how do you know how these two variables can change?
The material and the geometry. Well, we're testing both, because we're testing the whole shoe.
But your rules are only geometry. Right.
At the moment, totally. And that's what I don't agree with. At the moment, there are only the heights and the plate, how that is configured. So it's not even, I would say it's not even geometry, it's almost just more metric to what they look like. Whereas the energy tests, they also test the materials. And that's what I argue against, that at the moment we're testing nothing from material properties.
My other question, like, but my first one is, so the longer lever arm helps with propulsion movement.
Yeah.
But would that increase muscle demand and more like energy costs?
I think so. I mean, because you need to strengthen the calf muscles in the triceps to really come out with longer lever arm. But that's an interesting one, because once again, anecdotally, a lot of people say they're less tired in their calf muscles. And I mean, people can run further because they're getting less tired, and so it's less muscle work. But the moments at the ankle do increase, and that's been shown in the number of studies. But it's interesting that they don't feel like they're more tired. I mean, conversely, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that people say that they're getting more tired in the quadriceps. And we're showing a slightly longer eccentric phase in the quadriceps during the stance phase, which may lie behind that.
And then my last one
But not.
was, you were talking about prosthetics, and so your philosophy is that everyone should be on like an even playing field. Would you design a prosthetic so they're like, they perform like flexible and
I'll go back to the naked swimming bit. People that need a prosthetic need a prosthetic. They can't run without one. So there, I think it's exciting to develop. Let's make it fast with prosthetics. Because it's innovation for somebody that actually needs this technology. Or someone that's skiing, needs skis. So make them fast. That's great. I mean, I'm not trying to stop innovation, but I think there are sports where it's a bit weird that you're innovating so much when you don't actually need it. That's what this submitted article is about as well. Do you know what the only athletics equipment is that's not regulated at all? The carbon socks. It's the pole vault. They're allowed to do whatever they want and have it as stiff as they want. People can have their own individual poles. It's not regulated. So again, there's an advantage there that if the punters can run a lot faster than previous people have run or his competitors are running, he can also make himself as stiff as possible. Which he has, but he doesn't use it.
Okay, our last two questions are from Darren and Walter.
Wait, I think we've run out of time.
I have two, but maybe I'll just leave one and then move on there. But so from a technical side, you're potentially proposing regulating energy return.
Or at least stiffness. Which one?
Right, yeah, because I was just gonna ask, isn't energy return kind of like self-regulating? Meaning we already have shoes that are high 80s. You're only gonna get to like high 90s or mid 90s or that sort of stuff. So if it's already there.
Very good point. Very good point. I do think it's still going to go higher. I think we're going to approach 100. I mean, we won't get 100, but I think they're pushing 90 already. And we do see that they are increasing. But maybe it's too late.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
like maybe that ship has sailed on regulating.
it should have been 5 years ago. Yeah, good point.
Walter?
Do we have time?
Short question.
All the list of questions. I'm just going to ask maybe a couple. Forefoot versus rear foot running. Is there any difference for people in rear foot?
Yes, there has to be. But we don't have data on it. And I don't know if other people have seen any literature that actually looks at the four rear strike and differences. But I mean, he only runs on the 4 foot, but he has all this cushioning material at the back. And I asked myself, Brett was saying yesterday that there must be some effect of this as well that's helping, but I can't see how. And I mean, the fastest, or sprinters are only running 4 foot, but in the marathon, no one runs the whole marathon, only 4 foot. And so, but I honestly don't know, but I said yes at the start because I'm pretty convinced that it would be a difference. And the Kinta-Tocker effect, for example, would be very different if you're a rear strike or a 4 foot striker. But you look at this ultrafly, and even when I think about the Peter Potter effect, I always think that even for forward runners, presumably Peter Potter just from the curve from the midfoot to the front. And maybe that's why the plate is also curved.
Maybe you should teeter totter, despite the fact that you have a longer moment arm, you might need less force in the triceps surae to actually go through the motion of the ankle extension.
Starting to be convinced.
And the other question, really technical question, you know, when you say 80% energy return, you know, we do a lot of tendon testing, and depending on frequency, depending on the waveform that you're using, they're getting very different results. So I assume you have a very, your energy return is based on a very defined.
Yes. The protocol is completely standardized.
So it's a unique protocol, same frequency,
Yes.
same.
Yes. Same information, therefore. Yes.
So then my suggestion, you know, if you wanted to have a fair competition, you know, for your philosophical article there, would it be fair if all the leading runners, you would have them run, let's say at marathon pace, and on a treadmill, and you would measure oxygen uptake and the cost of transport, and you would give them shoes until everybody's cost of transport is the same, and then they would have to run in those shoes.
No, that's not fair either.
I didn't think so.
No, because I mean, some people, due to their running stride and technique, will have better costs of transport, and in that way, you're nullifying that training effect or genetic effect or whatever it is. You're nullified by doing that.
So what's the solution? If you want to have a fair competition.
Therefore, from a shoe perspective, I think it is. It's not going to happen. It's
It's
not
going to be slower, like naked swimming has been shown to be much slower.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
From a philosophical, and I'm taking liberty being the moderator and asking a question at this point, but from a philosophical standpoint, it almost seems like regulating anything, where do you draw the line for fairness? Because it seems like at that point, then you should regulate how much training someone can afford, or how much nutritional assistance or sleep, and how much tracking they can do, and so on and so forth. To me, it seems like that, where if someone can afford way more, then they have an unfair advantage, per se, of being at a position where they're starting off and then a higher chance of winning, for example.
But it's that person. And it's that person that's training more, it's that person that's eating better, it's that person that has the genetics, that has whatever characteristics that makes that person faster.
It almost
And then
seems like you
suddenly-
can throw in the shoe in there in that argument too, and it's just the person that.
But you don't need that, you need to eat.
Basically. All right, I think we can argue about this or talk about this more over chats, and I can share Tony's contact with everyone that would like to talk to him in the future, but let's thank him with that.